Good evening. So tonight I'm going to be redoing a video that I started last night. I got about 15 minutes in and it stopped recording. And then I went to the recordings file in Streamlabs and it wasn't there. So a shout out to Streamlab users, particularly new users. Make sure that you purge your recording files from time to time from Streamlabs quote memory. Apparently, once they get backlogged, they can prevent you from making new recordings. And just make sure that before you delete them, that you save them in a different file type on your computer or back them up onto an external hard drive, either way. So we'll see. I mean, I think I'm about 95% sure that that was the problem. We'll see once we get about 15 minutes into this video. So I'm going to be redoing a few things. And ultimately, tonight I'm going to be introducing Elanora, a sculpture, an early sculpture of mine, and then going right into Professor Mirandi's interview. And I'm going to be leaving a link to this video down below in the description. And then I'll hop up from the seat for a bit to turn off the other cam and rotating display, and then I'll come back and we'll get into this video. So here is Elanora. So this piece is about 15 inches tall. It's in bronze. There's a more in-depth narrative around it on my other channel, my Strictly Art channel here on YouTube, which I'll leave a link to as well. So this piece is around 2015 was the creation date. Not long after the Swamp Fairy Queen. I did the wax myself and delivered it to the foundry. The full title is Elanora, the Protector of Marsh Fairies and Connoisseur of Cantankerous Trolls. And as you can see down below, this is sort of a slice of the swamplands where she manifests and protects. And so she's 14 inches tall. The inhabitants of the homes would be maybe 3/16 of an inch tall. So she is dinosaur scale, very large being. And she's also a golem, a shape-shifting golem. Her body mass does not change, but how it configures itself is pretty much left up to her. In this form, she's manifested as a tri-marsupial sentient being with various other totemic spirits collaborating with her, which show up on the surface of her epidermis, if you want to call it that. And then the tail is a weapon, and it's in resting stage right now. The spikes fan out when she's adjusting attitudes. And you can see on her right leg an adjusted troll's head. And in her marsupial pouches are orphans that she's rescued from the swamp. And that's a crown that she was presented by a clan of ancient fairies and sprites, and she wears that during battle. had this piece cast in raw bronze. I believe it was a 4-piece mold, or not necessarily mold, but 4 pieces that I brought home. The end of the tail, the crown, and I believe I recall welding her onto her legs, if I'm not mistaken. So that's Elanora. I'm going to wait for her to come back around and face us, and then I'll switch over and to the full screen. Also did the patina on her, and she's archivally sealed. And she's available to the right home. Edition 1 of 1. So this is the only bronze that will ever exist on the planet. Okay. Till we meet again, Elanora. So I will be right back. So tonight, as I said previously, I am rehashing a few things because I spoke last night at length on this video, and now we're trying it out again. And my camera freaks out a little bit when I get up and return to the desk. There we go. So we will go to the video. Bear with me here. So I'll make sure that the scale is right for you. Get all the screen. Professor Mohammad Mirandi has been an extraordinary human being in educating the Westerners on the fact that those who judge others as barbarians, particularly citizens of a civilization that's been around for 4,000 plus years, are usually the barbarians judging. Iran is highly educated. Many of the government officials have multiple PhDs, well-read. So I would encourage people to hop on YouTube, look up on Iran documentary videos, and learn about what you assume is your enemy, and understand that while governments and regimes have their disagreements and varying ideologies, people are people. And just as we have right-wing folks in the United States that form militias and go about undermining their own government, both individualistically and group, other countries have those as well. And so the old adage of one finger pointing out and 3 pointing back applies here in spades for America. I'll go into a few other observations around American propaganda and perception of the other a little more into this video. I'll switch over to the screen share. So there he is. he has been through the thick of it, I must say. So let's get started.
Welcome back. We are joined again by Sayyid Mohammad Mirandi, a professor at Tehran University and a former advisor to Iran's nuclear negotiation team. Thank you for coming back on the program. These appear to be quite troubling times, though. What I hear is that another U.S. attack on Iran could be imminent, which could also have an additional component, that of a limited land invasion. I was wondering, how do you see it from there in Tehran? How stable is this ceasefire?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Glenn. It's always a great pleasure being on your show. Since the ceasefire began, they've been preparing for war, literally 24 hours a day. And the assumption was that this is not over, especially since Trump is not the sort of person who will accept defeat. And the 39-day war did not go well for the United States. It was a horrible war for the world and for humanity. But ultimately, the Iranians won the war. And so the belief here was that that would not be acceptable for Trump, and that would not be acceptable for the Zionist lobby and the Israeli regime.
Okay, so just as you know, there's a little bit of a delay on the original video, but my link between the two is a little delayed. So hopefully that's not too bothersome. Something I commented last night around Trump not wanting to accept defeat, something very important as far as core psychology goes, and his emotional quotient, and that is that he's already defeated. I feel like his arrested development occurred somewhere in the neighborhood of between 12 and 15 years old, and if you research his family history, his father specifically, a lot of dots can be connected as to his upbringing, lack thereof, humiliation by the father, his later attaching to a father figure in that individual. I may take a deep dive into a kind of ancestral psychoanalysis of the Trump family, but not tonight, and we'll see how that vibes out in the future. But I feel like with Trump, and with any politician, actually, I find it interesting that the American mainstream media nor independent media ever go into a deep dive of the ancestral lineage of problem childs, particularly the wives of politicians, which I feel is a huge missing equation into accountability and feedback. And of course, if the parents are alive, the parents would be two golden keys to acquire if permission, of course, was granted. And if not, if they aren't available on the mortal layer, then some kind of biographical analysis and asset building on the history of the parents, and then of course their parents, and the ancestry in general. I feel like the limestone bed of one's ancestry can shed some light, very abstract light at times, but at the same time, it provides a larger scale to feel things out on and analyze and hypothesize. And it also helps dilute the ego of the individual when you make it aware that you are aware of their lineage and their parenting, their ancestors, what they're responsible for, unpaid debts, pathological habits, attitudes, ideologies taught to the children, etc. And around Trump not accepting defeat and already being defeated, it's important to remember that Trump is, I feel like he has moments of self-awareness, not that he ever reveals that to anyone. I think it would be highly improbable, since he is a human being, that he does not have some real sense of his character. But there's an addiction, there's an emotional addiction that compartmentalizes that and puts it in a vault. And his reliance on externals, material wealth, although he's had about 6 or 7 bankruptcies, but his reliance on personal, how his personal is perceived by the public and various other, quote, friends is massive, abnormal even, which makes sense because it's a compensation device. So he's very neurotic around being seen and maintaining attention upon himself. Whenever he is prompted to give attention, he starts to fall asleep and get distracted. This is a kind of a not a diagnosis, but a aspect of a mental health condition that actually affects the central nervous system. And so he is very dependent on how he's perceived by others versus perceiving himself. So this is why he lies. He is a pathological liar, which is an additional mental health condition. Because the lie, when he hears it, it's feeding hope, although it's a false hope, but it's a short-lived perk, and it's a self-soothing ritual, pathologically lying. As long as he hears it, he's conjured a kind of transient spell upon himself. Although those hearing it may know absolutely that it's a lie, that he gets away with it and is not cross-examined. This is the drug. And you've noticed that in interviews, when he is cross-examined, there's a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde situation that occurs, and things get very dark very quick. It's almost as if he gets a kind of a swirling razor blade energy in his eyes, and anything can happen in a moment like that. It's like a mini psychotic break where he's presented with the mirror, and the external world is requesting that he looks internally at the contradictions and the dissonance that he is 98% invested in suppressing and keeping in the vault. So highly ultra sensitive to being called out.
Is the true force behind the war. As we recall, Joe Kent, in his resignation letter, he said that this war is all about the Zionist lobby and the Israeli regime. So there's no reason to think that anything has changed in the last couple of months. So it is possible that we will have war. No one knows for certain in Iran, but it is possible we will have it this weekend after the markets close, because apparently killing Iranians when the markets are closed is better, so that, God forbid, stock prices don't go down or anything like that. It could, of course, be tomorrow morning. It could be tomorrow evening. It could not happen this weekend. But I think that the problem is that Trump is incapable of using an off-ramp. We saw that earlier when the Iranians and the Americans had a ceasefire agreement, Netanyahu tried to wreck it by carpet bombing Lebanon. And so the Iranians said, as long as he's violating the ceasefire deal, we won't allow those extra ships to go through the Strait of Hormuz. Because
Okay, so a note on the Lebanon situation. Lebanon is being bulldozed, not thousands of bulldozers, but there are wrecking crews in Lebanon, and villages and churches are being leveled. Ultimately, the IDF are not interested in guerrilla warfare. Hezbollah is magnitudes higher, on a higher level of training than the reservists. So ultimately, they are going village to village, razing buildings to the ground, and the IDF is ultimately guarding, not so well, the wrecking crews, and those bulldozers and troop carriers are being targeted by drones on tethers that are fiber optic, so they're solid state drones that are being remote controlled by fiber optic line that is attached to a big spool, kind of like a fishing rod spool, but about 4 times bigger. And they're able to control that drone precisely through very sophisticated neighborhoods and buildings and strike their targets. So Israel is basically doing a Gaza 2 in Lebanon, and Gaza is also still under siege. Children being shot, violence in Jerusalem, in the West Bank. So that's all happening, and things are ramping up. Not that they've ramped down, but I think that Netanyahu and the Israeli regime, their own actions on the ground in Lebanon and Gaza and the West Bank are adding additional pressure for Trump to stay in line and do his part in their nightmare dream that they seem to be just very stuck to in a delusional way, irregardless of the world. Statistically, the world is against what Israel is doing, and sympathetic towards Iran. So
I should point out that the Strait of Hormuz was never closed by the Iranians. It was only closed to ships that were linked to Iran's adversaries. So Iraq had no problem. The Russians, the Chinese, and of course Iranian ships never had any problems. But the agreement was, within the agreement, there was going to be more ships passing through. That included ships belonging to the Emirates, the Saudis, the Kuwaitis, the Bahrainis, and I don't know which one I missed. But in any case, those extra ships would be going through. And because of Netanyahu, it didn't happen. And Trump sided with Netanyahu, even though the Pakistanis pointed out clearly that the ceasefire included Lebanon. But here's the point. When Netanyahu ultimately was forced to accept the ceasefire, even though now he's again killing Lebanese citizens 24 hours a day, like in Gaza, he could have, Trump, chosen the off-ramp, because the Iranians, when Netanyahu accepted that ceasefire, the Iranians said, okay, now we'll allow those extra ships to go through. And Trump almost immediately afterwards said, the Strait of Hormuz is open. It's never going to be closed again. The Iranians have promised, and he said a lot of nonsense, of course, but then he said that, but I'm keeping the siege on Iranian ports and the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, in place. So he could have chosen that as an off-ramp. That was possible, especially since Netanyahu accepted ultimately the ceasefire, at least for a few hours. So the belief is that he is incapable of moving in that direction, and therefore he's going to continue falling into the escalation trap. And that's why they believe that inevitably we're going to have another round, which will be devastating for the global markets and for for global trade and for the global economy. Because as things stand, the global economy is going to suffer enormously, and we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. But even if there's some sort of agreement, let's say in a few weeks' time, between Iran and the United States to allow more ships to get through and the siege, let's say, on the Strait of Hormuz to come to an end, then things will still be very bad.
So something I wanted to add here about citizenry and the quest for democracy, whatever that looks like inside each individual's head as a dream, because America is not a full-fledged democracy. We have democratic moments for sure, but when the pedal hits the metal, the Supreme Court is not a democracy. It's a cabal. When a president can install Supreme Court justices that favor him, that is not a democracy. So to get to the core of the issues, there has to be a visceral payment is due situation with the citizenry. And what I see in the future happening, it's just an intuition, because there's only but so many things a human being can do to resist. And whether those things are effective in the lifespan of those effectivenesses will vary on what one chooses to do. You can take a selfish route and go solo, kind of a lone wolf situation, which basically you get 15 minutes of fame and then your resistance disappears into the newspaper recycling bin and life goes on. This has been going on for a long time, but to me, a better strategy someday, sometime, is to form unions of hundreds of thousands of people based on either their region, their career, however they identify, the unions will form as political watchdogs, and when an official does something sketchy or comes up with a bad idea, those unions are triggered into action. And let's say Trump announces he's going to war without congressional support. Well, let's just say hypothetically, there was a union of, say, 15 million workers, and they're all linked with postal service and shipping, anything to do with shipping, right down to making cardboard boxes and packaging tape and bubbles for the shipping items, the trucks, the tires on the trucks, the engines, everything, anything and everything that makes up a shipping phenomenon. Airplanes, restaurants that serve those getting off the airplanes, all that. Say they were to suddenly go on strike, and the whole thing shuts down within 8 to 12 hours. Everything comes to a complete stop. And of course, with union dues, they would have money to back some of the time lost, not all of it. But there's a personal sacrifice involved in belonging to a union. That's just how things go in a world where there's resistance to common sense and humanity. So everything comes to a halt. Millions of dollars are being lost as the clock is ticking, and this puts pressure on the president to come to his senses and listen to a larger scale of common sense than his own reckless ego's subconscious pathology of psychosis, sociopathy, and a lingering revenge quest, basically projection and transference. So when Trump lashes out, he's acting out. And this has to be culled in the future. Citizenry, the only way to change it is visceral consequence, because humans are visceral beings, and they don't learn anything. They don't want to learn anything unless it's visceral. Well, let's say not that they don't want to learn anything, but let's say when there's resistance, it's a more psychological, emotional headspace situation. And if there's no price, if there's no visceral price for a bad choice or a criminal choice, then they don't need to engage in learning or self-examination or self-accountability. But when there's a visceral price to pay, a deterrence, then this forces the ego and the individual to step outside of its own mental health condition and reconsider, possibly even get help. So this would minimize absolute power is absolute corruption when there's consequences attached. That's rightly attached to a democratic citizenry.
And the pain is still on its way, the real pain. But if there is war, then that means that not only will there be devastation, especially if they target Iran's critical infrastructure, Iran will do the same to the Israeli regime and to those Arab family dictatorships in the Persian Gulf, which will, of course, make in future much less oil and gas and energy and fertilizer available for the global markets for a very long period of time, and lead to a global economic depression. But if the war goes, if it's a major war, and it goes on like the 39-day war, the Ramadan, then I think we can be confident, we can be pretty sure that there will no longer be any oil or gas coming from this region for the years to come. I mean, it will just be a very long-term economic depression for the world. But even if it's a short war, and as I said, it will still, and if some critical infrastructure is destroyed, it will lead to an economic depression for two reasons. One, because there will be less oil and gas available. But the second reason is that any negotiations to partially open the Strait of Hormuz, or to open the Strait of Hormuz and to lift the siege on and to revive the ceasefire in Gaza and Lebanon, that will be put back for many weeks because they'll be fighting. No one is going to be negotiating about ships going through the strait, Iranian or otherwise. Or a ceasefire in Lebanon and Gaza. So, and that will definitely be catastrophic for global trade and business and the global economy.
Yeah, the Trump diplomacy is quite strange because, you know, besides all the propaganda and his efforts to control the narrative, we know some things for certain. That is that the U.S. was getting into deep trouble, and Trump was getting desperate. We know this from the numbers of the missiles, interceptor missiles, that this was not sustainable. He couldn't absorb the pain, and they couldn't. Well, essentially, they didn't have enough ammunition. So we knew that things were going bad. They wanted a ceasefire. We also know this because otherwise the U.S. wouldn't have accepted Iran's 10-point plan as a condition for ceasefire. Whatever Trump says about the Iranians begging him, but what happened thereafter is, again, I guess it's a lot of deception. He walked away from. He never talked about those 10 points again. And then, he offers now an extended ceasefire as if he's doing the Iranians a favor. So in some regards, sometimes he can be good at controlling the narrative. Sometimes he goes, well, it stops being believable. But that's why it's a bit strange that after finally getting the guns to go silent, he wants to start this thing up again, which, would make you think that they have something up their sleeves, something that they would do different this time around. And, from your perspective there, sitting in Tehran, what do you think the U.S. would do if different, if they now, as you suggest, could invade or attack over the next few days, if not today?
Well, the only thing I can think of is that they will continue to do the same as they did before: assassinate, bomb infrastructure, terrorize the population, and also probably go more after critical infrastructure, as he had threatened to do so before. But the problem would be that the Iranians will strike back. And we've heard just today from a very senior Iranian MP who was a part of the delegation in Islamabad that if any assassinations take place this time round, that Iran will take out the leaders of the Arab regimes in the Persian Gulf, meaning Kuwait, Bahrain, the Emirates, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. That's what he said. And because he said that they are complicit, without them, this war can't take place. So if they start murdering our leaders, then they will destroy their palaces. And I would assume that would also mean destroying not just their critical infrastructure, but their intelligence agencies and their defense ministries and that sort of thing. So Iran will take its retaliatory violence to a very different level. So Iran has already said that critical infrastructure will be responded by striking critical infrastructure in the Israeli regime, but also in our region. So when you it's not a situation where the Americans will win, and we already see that Iranians are defiant. People are on the streets. They see the United States as the aggressor. The world sees the United States as the aggressor. I don't see how this will do Trump any good. It will just make things a lot worse for him, because at the end of the day, Trump is going to be answerable to Americans for their economic hardship. And one of the disturbing things that we often hear in the United States is that there are people who are sincerely anti-war and who are against the murder and slaughter of innocent people, who care about the children in Minab who the Americans massacred on day one. And there are others who don't really.
So, comment about the girls' school massacre. I mentioned this in another video. One of the key reasons that the United States launched a Tomahawk missile and slaughtered all those little girls was a lot of the military in Iran, their children went there and attended school there. So a horrific situation, and I cannot imagine the trauma that and rage that created and will never be resolved. To lose a child, there's no payback that will ever equalize the balance due. It's something unfathomable. Like the human is not programmed to fathom it or solve it. It's a torment that the parents will carry till their dying breath as unresolved. And the weight of that also rests on the individuals responsible and the enablers. And Saudi Arabia, UAE, Jordan, Egypt, Turkey, they're complicit. They're like the young teenage boys who think they know everything, leave home, and get themselves into trouble. And then when the police call the father says, well, keep him in jail. The tough love father that knows that only suffering one's own conscience and action, the results of one's actions, builds dignity, and but it also builds regret and resentment. So it all depends on how the child or the teenager takes the lesson. Because like Trump, he didn't take the lessons. Those lessons made a hard left instead of a smooth right. So he's been war dancing ever since, lying, embezzling, doing felonies, a whole host of things. So another thing I wanted to mention about something I saw today, Geraldo Rivera, uh, he was in a group discussion around Iran and various other situations that are happening in the Middle East. And he mentioned that Iran was involved in the destruction of a military barracks way back in like the 80s or 90s. And he presented it as if it just happened out of the blue, as if innocents were disappeared from the earth with no rhyme or reason. And I've noticed that that's how a lot of American propaganda is presented, a very one-sided presentation of as if you're the victim, as if you're not a military presence in a foreign land doing war crimes and inhabiting a base on foreign soil, backing and enabling Israel, who have been doing war crimes since their inception of 1947, 48, and even before 48. In the 20s, 1920s, there were skirmishes and massacres. So it's important to understand the context of these things. And if you hear an American commentator say something like that, understand that that they're crocodile tears, that no one in mainstream media doesn't have the ability to investigate and understand why it happened, not how it happened. The how is what they propagandize. And the why is what they never want to talk about, and become very irritable when you try to reason with them and explain to them, well, if there was a militia that showed up on my property, let's say I have 20 acres, and they show up on the edge of my property, and they set up camp, and then they start threatening my kids and me, leaving pipe bombs and trying to sabotage my well. Maybe they steal some livestock, poison my farm, irrigation water. There's going to be trouble if I have anything to say about it. And that trouble is not going to be in the form of turning the other cheek. So this is a human situation. If there's a threat to innocence, then that threat is approached not so innocently. It's approached with a reflection of an additional threat to it, right? And rightly so. This is the law of the human jungle, and we are all on a mammalian level in some respects. We have feelings, we have priorities, we have very earthbound priorities. Protect your children, protect your assets that you've worked very hard for. Protect yourself, protect others that you care for. And when a stranger who has no regard for those morals, ethics, principles, reasoning shows up on your property, and they start to threaten your quality of life, no matter how low or high it is, something's going to happen as a counterbalance to that threat. This is human nature. This goes all the way back down to, or up, or sideways to the Cro-Magnon and the Neanderthals. This is just base mammalian psychology. And It has nothing to do with religious ideology, none of that. This is just basic survival. And sometimes vengeance, because the American military, they like to drop dumb bombs on civilians and kill tens of thousands. And so that, in doing that, you create debt, plain and simple. And that debt is quested by those citizens that felt that loss upon the oppressors. And this is also just human nature, that in order to live with yourself as a victim, some form of jurisprudence or justice must be had by any means necessary, sometimes, depending on the severity of the injustice. So think about this. When you hear only one side of the story, as if it's the story, Geraldo Rivera saying things like that is, in my mind, it's a criminal offense. I would say, as a journalist, not that he is, but in the realm of public influence, it ought to be a felony. So that's that on that.
Care, but they talk about jobs and they talk about inflation, and like many elites, they talk about American lives and American soldiers who are not victims at all in all of this. But in any case, both groups of people, their voices are going to grow louder. Whether those who see the United States regime as being, as they point out, that it is aggressive and barbaric and doing all of this for the sake of Zionism and for a genocidal regime, and those who are going to say that you're ruining our livelihood, our farms are going to go bankrupt, our businesses are going to get ruined, American lives will be lost, and the US economy will suffer, and the deficit will grow. These two forces combined, though completely unrelated to one another, one is moral and the other one is simply is selfish, but they're going to make Trump suffer enormously as a result of the war. It's not a situation where he can win.
So another point I wanted to make, it's not necessarily a point, it's more of an intuition that I have. Okay, so Russia wants Ukraine, not for dissimilar reasons that China wants Taiwan, because the U.S. buildup near Taiwan or in the region, and Russia is ultimately, not Russia, Israel is ultimately the Taiwan of America, as a proxy unsinkable battleship. Other monarchies in the Middle East are also, in a sense, NATO-connected ones, but ultimately, no one is as bulldogish and on a leash to serve the G7 like Israel is. They are the guardian of the Suez Canal, and they have illegal nuclear weapons, so they're a deterrent agent as well. So there's leverage there. And Britain knew this before 1948. Israel was established as a British colony state. So, in spirit, that is. I mean, they quickly broke allegiances with Britain, at least outwardly. So, ultimately, I feel that Iran is getting advice from Russia and China. And that advice is based on, of course, not only Russia and China's knowledge of the United States and how its psychology works, but also Iran has its own experience with the United States. And they understand that diplomacy never works with the United States, that only a visceral response and materialistic price to be paid will work. And this is how obstinate the mental health condition of the pathology that America and Britain and most of the G7 share together. There is a supremacy aspect, and it is corrupted. All supremacy is corrupted. And the only thing you can do with a corrupted file is delete it, in the sense that it cannot be rehabilitated. It has to be internally, on an individual level, completely dismissed. You cannot change it. You can use it to improve yourself in being humbled by the fact that such a corrupted file was ever able to seduce you into being whatever you became by its effect. But it itself is an influence that cannot be cajoled or spoken to in a reasonable way. It's something that will need to be simply dissolved and returned to the elements from which it came. And the obstinance is extraordinary, the depth and density of it, that this imaginary picture of supremacy versus just simply being a human being and having some self-awareness and humility and feelings and empathy and reasonableness and sharing in just a common sense level of humanity as an individual, as a very tiny speck of an individual in a world of 8 billion people. The ego is a monumental Goliath, but it's also hollow. And it may take 8 hours for one echo to travel from one end of the hollow statue to the other, but it's still a hollow statue. And so, on Russia's advice and China's advice and Iran's own advice, I think they formed an understanding of the language that communicates the best with obstinance, and that is material loss, a material threat, a visceral experience versus diplomacy and head games. Because Israel has never kept a ceasefire. They do not negotiate. And if they do negotiate, it's to buy time to do what they wanted to do in the first place. prior to negotiations. Their obstinance is based on supremacy as well. So something to consider going forwards, or as we go backwards.
I don't even believe that the Israeli regime will win. This is not because after 2.5 years, we've seen what has happened to the image of the Israeli regime. Across the world, it's despised. People are watching now what's going on in Lebanon, even though Western media is not reporting it, and Western journalists are quiet about it, or they're misrepresenting it, trying to portray it as like Hezbollah targets, and they're ignoring Gaza. But people across the world are still seeing these images in a much censored social media. It's still coming through. But in addition to that, as people's personal lives become much more influenced by the global economic catastrophe heading our way, they're going to blame Israel. They're going to blame Zionism. They're going to blame Netanyahu. They're going to blame Trump. So I don't see how the Israeli regime benefits from this. It hurts this. It is hurt from all of this. The only person who would probably benefit would be Netanyahu, who thrives on crises, at least for now, and the fanatics in his coalition.
Okay, so I think we're a little over an hour in, and I'm going to pause it here as possibly a part 1 of 2. I think there's as far as the beneficial side of this, it's multi-layered. I'm sure there's a lot of wishful thinking going on, daydreaming as well, war profiteers, of course, but mainly it's a trying to save face, irregardless of the cost. America and Israel, the masks are off, and the elite are in denial about this. I mean, for now, I think that's slowly disintegrating as well, as material costs and consequences come down the pipeline to further crush the dust into finer dust. But the mask is off. Both masks, the one they wear in the front and the back. So ultimately, we're headed towards a very peculiar next few decades. The whole mainstream media is starting to dissolve as well, and I support that disillusion. I feel like individuals getting out and putting nose to grindstone and doing their homework and sharing the ritual of homework. And what I mean by this is scholarly work around deconstructing propaganda, dissecting it, fact-checking, going back through UN reports, actual eyewitness accounts, and forensically investigating a claim, like the one Geraldo Rivera says about the military complex being hit and so many soldiers losing their lives. Well, that's what happens in war. That's what happens when you get blowback from who knows what war crime was committed, what atrocity that blowback was a vengeance hit for. But when you're a threat, you're going to create threats for yourself. That is how the world of human beings works. And it's also how nature works. So getting down into the forensic analysis of events, doing some serious sleuthing around and educating your friends and family, And it's going to be painful because the ego is ultimately concerned for itself. And there's strategies to compartmentalize chapters of life so that you can only stay within your own personal bubble. And okay, to each his own. That's how the world works. I'm going to switch back over to the main screen here real quick. So that's how the world works. People compromise various chapters in order to maintain just basically staring at the library that they have, how impressive it is, how many books they have, and they've never read one of them. So accountability, transparency, self-examination, mental health, consequences. These are things that will need to be put into practice someday, starting with individuals. And I feel like YouTube is a good platform for experimenting with that and at least practicing it. I mean, I know that YouTube also shadow bans channels and limits things, and yet the opposition resistance folks are still allowed a platform, and so there is some dissonance there. There's a sort of a wink and a nod, I think, from YouTube. They do their due diligence in demonetizing, but at the same time, they don't necessarily remove the entire channel. So there's some insincerity going on there. I think if it was a true far-right regime running YouTube, you would not see any videos speaking out against the regime. But you do see those videos. Midas Touch is a good mom and pa sort of relatable network that's a good example of that the Trump regime is going against and challenging here currently. So that's pretty much it. It's for tonight. I appreciate Professor Mirandi very much. He has given so much to the journalistic community and the world at large. So I will say good night to you and thank you for listening and supporting the channel. Please like and subscribe. Again, the link to Elanora's deeper story will be down in the description. And I wish you a very good night and tomorrow. Thank you.